Welcome to this lecture on ecological succession. Imagine a massive forest fire sweeping through a beautiful national park, leaving absolutely nothing behind but black ash and bare dirt. To our eyes, it looks like the end of the world, a completely dead zone where nothing will ever live again. But nature has an incredible, unstoppable process of healing itself. Today, we are going to explore exactly how an empty plot of land transforms, step by step, into a complex, stable, and thriving neighborhood. To begin understanding how ecosystems develop, let us look at the magic of nature's recovery. Why does this matter? Because ecosystems are constantly subjected to disturbances, and their ability to bounce back is what keeps our planet alive. When a completely dead zone is left alone, tiny green shoots of grass will eventually poke through the ash. A few years later, small bushes will follow, and eventually, towering trees will return to claim the land. This is not random. It is a highly structured biological sequence. Ecologists call this incredible rebuilding process ecological succession. Now that we have a visual idea of this recovery, let us define it formally. In ecological terms, succession is the gradual and predictable process of change in the species composition of a community over time. It is important to realize that this happens in distinct phases, which ecologists call seral stages. In each stage, one group of plants and animals is systematically replaced by another. The very first hardy species to arrive in a lifeless area are called pioneer species. They do the incredibly hard work of breaking down rocks and creating soil. As the soil improves, more complex plants move in, eventually leading to a stable, self-sustaining state known as the climax community. Building on our formal definition, we must distinguish between the two main starting points for this process. Succession does not always start from the exact same baseline. Primary succession happens when life takes hold on entirely new land, like bare rock newly formed from a volcano. Because there is no soil at all, this process takes a very long time. On the other hand, secondary succession happens when a disturbance, like a forest fire or a flood, clears out an existing community but leaves the nutrient-rich soil intact. Because the soil is already there, the ecosystem has a massive head start, and the recovery process is significantly faster. Before we dive into the mathematics of how this works, let us understand why ecological succession matters in the real world. Understanding this concept is absolutely critical because it allows us to predict how ecosystems will respond to severe disturbances. Foresters and conservationists rely on this knowledge to manage timber harvesting, ensuring forests can regenerate properly after trees are cut down. Furthermore, it is the foundational concept behind restoration ecology. When scientists actively help repair damaged environments, like abandoned strip mines or polluted lakes, they are essentially kickstarting and guiding the succession process. Ultimately, it teaches us that ecosystems are not static museum exhibits, but dynamic, living systems. Now that we understand the biological importance, let us look at how we can measure this progress mathematically. While succession is a highly visual process, ecologists track it by looking at how the total living mass, or biomass, increases over time. As pioneer species grow and are replaced by larger shrubs and trees, the total biomass follows a predictable mathematical pattern known as a logistic growth curve. Why does this happen? Initially, the empty land provides abundant sunlight and space, allowing for rapid, explosive growth. However, as the ecosystem fills up with larger plants, competition for resources becomes fierce. This naturally causes the growth rate to slow down until the climax community is reached. This brings us to the mathematical formula that models this exact behavior. Conceptually, this equation captures how a population grows rapidly at first, but slows down as it runs out of space. Let us break down the symbols. The term dB over dt represents the rate of change of biomass over time, meaning how fast the ecosystem is packing on new weight. The symbol R stands for the intrinsic growth rate, telling us how aggressively species grow with unlimited resources. The variable B is the current biomass at any given moment. Finally, K represents the carrying capacity, which is the maximum biomass the environment can support. Notice that as B gets closer to K, the term in the parentheses approaches zero, causing the overall growth rate to slow down and eventually stop. Let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. We are looking at a recently burned forest undergoing secondary succession. We are given an intrinsic growth rate of 0.2 per year, a carrying capacity of 10,000 kilograms per hectare, and a current biomass of 1,000 kilograms per hectare. We want to find the current rate of biomass accumulation. First, we substitute our known values into the logistic growth equation. We multiply the growth rate by the current biomass to get 200, which is the theoretical growth if space were unlimited. Next, we simplify the fraction inside the parentheses to 0.9, meaning 90% of the environment space is still available. Multiplying these gives us our final answer. The ecosystem is currently adding 180 kilograms of biomass per hectare every year, showing rapid recovery in this early stage. Now that we have calculated how biomass grows, we must also look at how the actual species change. As succession progresses, the community composition does not just grow, it shifts dynamically. New species constantly arrive to colonize the area, taking advantage of the improving soil and shade. At the same time, the older pioneer species that need direct sunlight are outcompeted, shaded out, and eventually go locally extinct. To understand how fast this replacement is happening, ecologists use a metric called the species turnover rate. This rate measures exactly how much the community's identity has shifted over a specific period, allowing us to compare the stability of different ecosystems. To quantify this shifting community, we use the species turnover rate formula. Conceptually, this formula compares the total amount of change against the total pool of species that existed during the study period. Let us define the variables. T is the species turnover rate formula. In the numerator, C represents the number of new colonizations, and E represents the number of local extinctions. Adding these together gives us the total number of species changes. In the denominator, S1 is the initial species count at the start of the time period, and S2 is the final species count at the end. If the number of colonizations and extinctions increases, the turnover rate goes up, indicating a highly unstable, rapidly changing environment. Let us apply this formula to a recovering meadow over a 10-year period. We are given that 15 new plant species colonized the area, while 5 pioneer species went extinct. The meadow had 30 species at the start of the decade and 40 species at the end. We need to find the species turnover rate. We plug our values into the formula. In the numerator, 15 plus 5 gives us 20 total species changes. In the denominator, 30 plus 40 gives us a combined pool of 70 unique species observed across the decade. Dividing 20 by 70 gives us approximately 0.286. This means that roughly 28.6% of the community's composition changed during this decade, which is a high turnover rate, typical of early succession. Now that we have calculated the math behind the process, let us look at the entire journey visually. In this diagram, the horizontal axis represents time in hundreds of years, while the vertical axis tracks the increase in biomass and biodiversity. On the far left, we see the pioneer stage, starting with bare rock, where hardy lichens and mosses begin the slow process of soil formation. Moving to the right into the intermediate stages, the soil deepens, allowing grasses, shrubs, and young trees to take root and outcompete the pioneers. Finally, on the far right, we reach the climax community. Here, you see a dense, mature forest with towering trees and deep root systems. This visual perfectly summarizes how nature systematically rebuilds a stable ecosystem from nothing. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the most important ideas. First, ecological succession is nature's systematic and predictable method of building or rebuilding an ecosystem from the ground up. Second, we learned that pioneer species are the crucial first responders. They prepare the harsh environment, paving the way for increasingly complex plants and animals. Third, we saw that this recovery is not just biological, but mathematical, with biomass accumulating along a predictable logistic growth curve. Finally, this beautiful relay race of species replacement always culminates in a stable, mature climax community that can sustain itself for centuries. You now have a solid understanding of how dynamic and resilient our natural world truly is.